My VP secretly rigged a $10,000 office pool with a hidden Excel macro, so I hijacked his code and exposed his fraud to the entire company. I was leaning against the cold granite counter of the corporate break room, watching our vice president of sales take a slow, arrogant sip of his artisan espresso as the final seconds of the March Madness game ticked down on the 80-inch flat-screen TV. He had his smug eyes locked on the screen, waiting for the buzzer to officially declare him the winner of our $10,000 office pool, completely entirely unaware that in exactly 30 seconds, the custom code I had injected into his hidden Excel macro was going to violently dismantle his entire life. To understand the sheer, catastrophic magnitude of the trap I had set, you have to understand the toxic wasteland of a corporate culture I had been navigating for the past 4 years. I am a senior data architect for a mid-sized logistics software firm. My entire existence in this company has been confined to the sub-freezing temperatures of the server room and the glowing blue light of my 3 monitors. I built this company's data warehouse from the absolute ground up. I wrote the pipelines that tracked our global freight, I optimized the servers that kept our applications from crashing during peak hours, and I spent 80-hour weeks making sure the executives had pretty, color-coded dashboards to present to our investors. 3 months ago, the director of analytics position finally opened up. It was a role I had essentially been doing without the title or the pay for over a year. I walked into the corner office of Rick, our VP of sales, carrying a meticulously bound portfolio of my structural achievements, expecting a formal handshake and a promotion. Instead, Rick, a man who wore too much Tom Ford cologne and practiced his golf swing in the middle of the open-plan office, didn't even look up from his phone. He casually informed me that I lacked cultural synergy and that the director position was being given to Chad. Chad was a junior analyst whose primary qualification was drinking heavily with Rick at the local country club and losing to him on the back nine. I was expected to train Chad on the architecture I built, while Chad made $40,000 a year more than me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I felt the heat rising in my neck and my vision went completely blurry with rage, but I simply nodded, walked out of his glass-walled office, and immediately began to quietly quit. I stopped working weekends. I stopped answering frantic late-night emails. I retreated into the shadows of the IT department, doing exactly the bare minimum required to collect my paycheck while I updated my resume. But then, the legendary March Madness office pool began. In our company, the basketball bracket wasn't just a casual game, it was an absolute religion. Because we had regional branches across 3 states, the buy-in was a steep $100, and over 100 employees participated. We are talking about a massive, physical cash pot of $10,000. The money was collected in crisp $100 bills, sealed in a beige fireproof lockbox, and kept under the desk of Brenda, our terrified HR manager. The brackets themselves were tracked via a massive, highly formatted Excel workbook hosted on the company's main shared server. The file was strictly read-only for everyone in the company, heavily protected so that no one could alter their picks once the tournament began. The only person with the master password to edit the workbook was the commissioner of the pool, Rick. It was a Tuesday evening, a week into the tournament. The office was completely dead, the only sound being the rhythmic hum of the HVAC system overhead. I was sitting at my desk, running a routine storage optimization protocol on our legacy S drives. The server was flagging a massive memory leak originating from the shared employee directory. I traced the path, and it led directly to March_Madness_master_bracket_v4.xlsx. The file was eating up an unfathomable amount of RAM for a simple spreadsheet. My curiosity took over. I opened the file. The sheets were locked, and the VBA developer tab was grayed out behind a password prompt. Rick's password was likely something pathetic like Golf Pro 1, but I didn't even bother wasting the keystrokes to guess it. I opened my terminal, ran a standard hex editor script to bypass the DPB string in the Excel backend, and cracked the developer module wide open. I expected to find some sloppy VLOOKUP tables or maybe some bloated conditional formatting. Instead, staring back at me on my left monitor, was a heavily obfuscated, incredibly complex VBA macro module named auto_calculate_winners. I began to translate the code, line by line, and a cold, creeping disgust washed over me. The script was insidious. It wasn't just a tool to tally the points. It was a highly sophisticated cheating engine. Rick had programmed the macro with a strict timer constraint. Exactly 10 minutes before the end of each game day, the script would silently execute a loop through every single employee's bracket column. If the math determined that an employee was on a higher point trajectory than Rick, the macro would execute a sabotage protocol. It would quietly inject a microscopic #ref or a calculation error directly into their specific point multiplier cells, artificially dragging their score down without alerting them. Then came the truly despicable part. Once the competition was digitally crippled purpled, the macro sent a stealth GET request to a live, external sports betting API, pulled the exact winning combinations for the day's games, and overwrote Rick's personal bracket with the perfect picks just seconds before the matches concluded. Rick wasn't just predicting the games, he was literally playing God with $10,000, ensuring that the administrative assistants, the warehouse workers, and the junior developers mathematically could never win. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, absolutely disgusted by the sheer, pathetic greed of a man who made $500,000 a year, yet still felt the need to systematically rob his own subordinates. But as I traced the routing logic of his API to see exactly where he was pulling the external data from, my blood turned to absolute ice. That's when the real bombshell dropped. The macro wasn't just hitting a sports betting site. Embedded deep within the error handling loop of the VBA script was a secondary, heavily encrypted payload. It was pinging a highly secure, private offshore banking portal based in the Cayman Islands. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacking echoing in the empty office. I dug deeper into the hidden server directory where Rick had mapped his personal executive drives. I bypassed the administrative privileges, bypassed the secondary firewall, and cracked open a hidden subfolder. Inside was a secondary ledger, a massive, terrifyingly detailed digital ledger. Rick wasn't just cheating at basketball, he was laundering money. For 3 years, Rick had been systematically manipulating the company's sales commission fund. Every time a major enterprise logistics deal closed, he was skimming microscopic fractions of percentages off the top, money that was supposed to go directly to the junior sales reps. We are talking over $40,000 a year in stolen commissions. But Rick had a massive problem: to move that stolen digital money out of his offshore accounts without triggering an audit from the IRS or the company's internal finance team. He needed a highly visible, legitimate influx of cash to explain his sudden wealth to his wife and his bankers. The $10,000 office pool was entirely untraceable physical cash. He would rig the pool, win the 10 grand, deposit the legitimate cash into his domestic accounts, and then quietly wire his skimmed digital commission funds into his offshore haven. The March Madness pool wasn't just a game to him. It was his annual, tax-free laundering mechanism to perfectly cover his tracks. I didn't delete the macro. I didn't alert human resources. I sat in the glowing dark of the server room for the next 4 hours and completely rewrote his digital DNA. I kept his cheating engine perfectly intact so he wouldn't suspect a thing, but I attached a payload to the end of his code, a nuclear audit trigger. I mapped his hidden Cayman Islands ledger directly into the main March Madness workbook. I wrote a customized PowerPoint VBA script and forced it into the local startup directories of every single computer on the company network. Finally, I tied the master execution command to the exact moment the final buzzer of the first round of games would sound. Thursday, March 12, 3:26 p.m. The break room was absolutely packed. The smell of stale microwave popcorn and burnt corporate coffee hung heavily in the air. At least 50 employees were crammed around the granite island, their eyes glued to the 80-inch television screen. The underdog team was down by 2 points, the clock was flashing red, and the tension in the room was suffocating. Rick stood right at the front of the crowd, wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my car. He was holding court, sipping his espresso, practically radiating smug satisfaction. His company-issued iPad was resting on the counter in front of him, the March Madness Excel sheet open and waiting to refresh. Tough break, accounting department, Rick gloated loudly, not even looking at the miserable faces of the finance team standing near the fridge. Looks like my bracket is going to sweep the floor again. You guys really need to learn how to analyze player statistics. It's a science, really. You've won 3 years in a row, Rick, Brenda from HR muttered, crossing her arms defensively. Statistically, it's virtually impossible. I just have a gut instinct for winning, Brenda, he hissed, his tone dripping with condescending venom. Maybe if you had it, you wouldn't still be filing paperwork. On the television, the point guard launched a desperate, half-court shot. The ball sailed through the air in agonizing slow motion. The red buzzer blared loudly through the soundbar. The ball hit the rim, bounced twice, and fell out. The game was over. Well, let's see what the master spreadsheet says, Rick smirked, tapping the screen of his iPad to refresh the server link and trigger his daily calculation. The payload dropped. The 80-inch television in the break room violently flickered, the basketball game completely vanishing into a sea of digital static. But it wasn't just the TV. Through the glass walls of the break room, I could see every single monitor in the massive open-plan office behind us go pitch black simultaneously. A collective gasp rippled through the room. People stepped back from the counters, their eyes darting around in confusion. Then, the screen snapped back to life. Every single monitor in the building, including the massive presentation screen in the corporate lobby downstairs, was violently locked into a PowerPoint presentation running in kiosk mode. The slide displayed a massive, high-definition, side-by-side comparison. On the left, Rick's actual pics, a pathetic, losing bracket filled with red X's. On the right, Rick's API cheat mode, the mathematically perfect bracket, generated exactly 10 minutes ago. Between the two graphics, the exact lines of his VBA cheating code were exposed in bright neon red font, highlighting exactly how he had been injecting calculation errors into Brenda's and the other employees' cells. The murmurs in the room escalated into an immediate, furious roar. People were pointing at the screen, realizing they hadn't just lost a game, they had been systematically robbed of their own money. Rick's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. He frantically jammed his thick fingers against the screen of his iPad, desperately trying to close the server link, but the device was completely frozen by the payload. But that was just the appetizer. 5 seconds later, the true devastation initiated. At the bottom of every single screen in the building, a massive, bold black ticker appeared, scrolling across the bottom like a breaking news alert on a cable network. Commission skimming detected. $42,500 annually. Source, Rick's personal Excel macro. Destination, Cayman Islands account ending in 8842. Attached ledger sent to entire company mailing list. A deafening, terrifying silence fell over the room. You could literally hear the hum of the refrigerator motor. The anger in the room instantly morphed into profound, absolute shock. Rick dropped his iPad. The expensive glass shattered loudly against the hard linoleum floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. Who did this? He screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated, primal panic. He spun around, his eyes wild and completely unhinged. This is a hack. Shut the servers down. Shut them down right now. He lunged toward the wall, his hands grasping for the heavy HDMI cable behind the television, desperate to rip it out of the wall. But a heavy, unforgiving hand clamped down hard on his tailored shoulder. It was David, our chief technology officer, and standing directly behind him, blocking the single exit to the break room, were two massive, unsmiling corporate security guards. I had sent David an automated critical system alert directly to his private terminal exactly 5 minutes prior. The alert contained the full, unredacted path to Rick's hidden ledger, the API network logs, and a complete forensic breakdown of the money laundering operation. Take your hands off the equipment, Rick, David growled, his voice vibrating with absolute, terrifying authority. David, you have to listen to me. This is a disgruntled employee. This is a virus. It's slander. Rick shrieked, the sweat physically beading on his forehead and rolling down his temples. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving violently under his expensive silk tie. The IT forensics team is already inside your office physically pulling your hard drives, David replied coldly, stepping directly into Rick's personal space, forcing the VP to back up against the counter. You routed an illegal offshore banking API through the company's main server to facilitate a $10,000 cash fraud. That data crossed state lines, Rick. That elevates this from a corporate termination to federal wire fraud. You are completely done. The two security guards didn't wait for Rick to mount another pathetic defense. They stepped forward, grabbed him by both of his arms, and forcefully marched him out of the break room. 50 employees parted like the Red Sea, glaring at him with pure, unadulterated hatred as he was dragged toward the elevator banks. The fallout was an absolute corporate bloodbath. Because the office pool involved over $10,000 in cash, crossed state lines via the server architecture, and was directly tied to stolen corporate commissions, the company was legally obligated to report the incident to the authorities. The local police didn't handle it. It was immediately bumped up to a full-blown federal wire fraud investigation. Our CEO, a man who spent his life terrified of bad PR and class action lawsuits, went into full damage control mode. He was absolutely paralyzed by the thought that 100 employees might band together and sue the company for allowing a vice president to run a fraudulent gambling and laundering ring on company hardware. The very next morning, an emergency all-hands meeting was called. The CEO, sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights, announced that Rick had been terminated for gross misconduct. To avoid a mass exodus and potential legal action, the company was officially seizing the $10,000 cash pot from the lockbox, quadrupling it with corporate funds, and distributing $40,000 equally among every single participant in the pool as an immediate morale and retention bonus. The only people excluded from the payout were the executive vice presidents. As for me, an hour after the all-hands meeting, I was summoned to the mahogany desk of the CEO's private office. He didn't didn't ask me if I was the one who wrote the payload. He knew. Everyone in the C-suite knew I was the only person in the building with the technical capability to reverse engineer Rick's code and deploy a network-wide broadcast. He slid a completely blank contract across the desk. He needed someone who intimately understood the architecture of the server to lead a full, unredacted forensic audit of the entire sales department to uncover exactly how far Rick's skimming operation went. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply picked up his heavy Mont-Blanc pen, crossed out my current title, and wrote Principal Architect and Lead Forensic Auditor. Then, I moved to the salary line and wrote down exactly double my previous compensation. The CEO looked at the number, swallowed hard, and signed his name at the bottom without saying a single word. Chad, the golf buddy who stole my promotion, was quietly let go 2 weeks later when my audit revealed he was entirely incapable of navigating the basic data pipelines without Rick holding his hand. I now have his office, an impenetrable server network, and the absolute, unspoken respect of every single employee who received a massive, unexpected bonus check in their bank account. Rick is currently facing multiple federal indictments, staring down the barrel of serious prison time, and his offshore accounts have been completely frozen by the authorities. Am I the monster here for hijacking a server network to publicly annihilate my boss, or did he get exactly what he deserved for trying to steal from the people who built his empire?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.